Welcome back to another podcast.
Another episode of Reveal. Today, we are going to dive into our relationships.
Alexa, stop.
It's not Alexa. Hey Google, stop the music.
Ew.
Sorry, we are going to dive into sort of our relationships with our parents growing up. Like, how did you grow up? Like, I was very much a latchkey kid. My mom worked, and probably, I want to say around 9 years old or so, I stopped going to after school and before school care, and it was my responsibility to get myself up in the morning, get myself to school, come home after school, do my homework, have a snack, and just basically chill and do whatever until my mom got home from work, which would probably be around dinner time. But I always went up to your place. I was always like, I'm going up to Guy's house, because we lived in the same apartment building, so it was
I think that's a big responsibility. Not so much to come home after school, because I had to do that too, but to have to get yourself up and get ready and not have anyone be like, okay, it's time to get ready, have you had breakfast? Like, I've always had that growing up. We lived when we lived with my grandpa, when we still lived in Nova Scotia, he was basically like my nanny, right? Like, he would get up, he would make sure I was there after school, but he had MS, so he was always around, but
with limitations, I guess.
Yes. Like, growing up with him always being there, I always felt like he was more of a father figure to me than my own dad was.
Yeah.
Whereas my uncle, who's only 9 years older than me, has a different insight on it. He's like, yeah, but he couldn't play baseball. He couldn't because he had MS, so he couldn't do all these things. I'm like,
I never really do those things, though.
But he was a boy, so he was like,
That's
well, yeah. And he was like, because my mom and her sisters are always like, oh, he was in everything growing up. And he's like, that's why, because like, I didn't have anyone that was able to like do those
boy kind of things.
When it comes to, I know you had referred to it as a latchkey kid, and I didn't know what that was, because I always went to daycare. And then when we had moved to Vancouver, my mom always was kind of between jobs, so she was kind
of was always generally home or around, and if not, your dad was.
Yeah,
it was trading off.
But the side of the downfall of that, though, is when my parents had Kyrell.
Yeah.
And they were both working full time, and then this little baby became my responsibility to take care of. I held on to like a lot of resentment towards my parents for many, many years, because it came back to not being heard, right? Like when I was growing up and like I was getting molested or whatever, and I didn't know how to have these conversations with my parents, like, I don't feel comfortable. And then I remember having the conversation with my mom, and I was like, I want to be able to join a sport after school. I want to be able to go to a friend's place. I want to be able to enjoy high school. And she was like, well, talk to your dad about it. And I was just like, well, he's not going to do anything. So again, it came to this whole thing of me not being heard, which then turned into me acting out and being a bitch, really. Like, I just had so much anger built up.
But that is also a lot of responsibility, because like, I remember, like, because we grew up in the same building for so many years, that I remember you coming and picking up your brother from school, like, because his daycare was beside our high school, so you'd go and pick him up from from daycare after high school, and then go take him home, and then watch him until your parents were home. And I remember teachers thinking that it was your baby for like the longest time, because you were going to pick the baby up and taking it home, and no one seen your parents. And I was like, wow. But that is also a big responsibility, because now you're not just responsible for yourself, getting yourself where you gotta go and back, but now you're responsible for like another human being, and being like almost like that teen mom vibe without actually being a teen mom.
I didn't like it. And I think, I don't know if it's all households or if it's, but I know predominantly in Black households, like, my parents had me when they were young, like 19 and 21, right?
Well, I guess my mom was like 23 when she had me, so.
Okay, so when you don't think of it then, but like, you're still growing up, right?
Oh, I think about that now, because that's when I had my kids.
Yeah,
right?
me too. Yeah. But I don't know if it's I don't know. I sometimes I think, like, did they do this to me because they didn't want me to have a baby at a young age?
Kind of like give you the shock of reality.
Yeah,
this
like,
is what it is.
This is what it is. And I was just like,
but that's not a good way to like shock.
No, because I ended up leaving home because I got so irritated. Like, I'm trying to have this conversation with my parents. I'm like, I'm not happy. I want to be able to enjoy my life. And it was like, oh, well, you got to pick them up. You got to pick them up. And then when I had moved out when I was 18, my dad started working from home, and I'm thinking to myself, how come you couldn't do this before?
Because I remember going up, and I remember at the end, at like high school when you were starting to kind of go more rebellious and being like, no, I'm not doing it, and you just would like leave and just like not come back or whatever. That's when I remember I started to babysit after school or like after things. Like I wouldn't pick him up, but I definitely remember like watching him more often, and then he became my little buddy man. Like we'd play cars, we'd do all kinds. Like he was like my little buddy, me and him. Yeah. But then it was like, I get what you're saying. Like, for me, it was different. Like, I enjoyed it. But, like, I didn't have to do the pickups and the drop-offs. Yeah. It wasn't my sibling. And growing up, pretty much, I feel, not on my own, because my mom, she was great. She made sure we had food. She made sure, like, you know, she worked hard. But getting myself up ready for school, starting at, like, 9-10 years old, and then also coming home by myself and doing that from that age right through high school, because I think like probably by the time I was in grade 8 or so, my mom then worked 2 jobs. So then she was working 7 days a week, and I was home by myself a lot, like before school, after school, on the weekends.
When you got in high school and you were home by yourself a lot, were you being like the cute little kid that your mom, or like the innocent kid, or were you out there doing shit you shouldn't have been doing?
You know what? At the beginning, I was still very much like, by the rules, like I'm this and that. But then having no siblings, and then my dad wasn't in my life, so, you know, he would pop in or out, and for the majority of the time he wouldn't be there. So it was just me and my mom. So probably about grade 9 is when I realized even getting like straight A's, not missing a single day of school, not being late for a single day of school, all this stuff, I don't know, I felt like I was almost seeking appraisal, almost in a sense, to make her be around more. Even though like I was like, okay, yeah, like you're getting a second job so you can have more money to pay more things, but it wasn't like we were living like badly. Like we still had like a fairly good living standard, if that makes sense. But it was just like when she was home or she was around, she was tired. So maybe on the weekends when they got time, we'd play a game or we'd go to the movies or something. But for the most part, it's like, okay, just go play with your toys, or okay, I'll arrange a play date, or like just go do something by yourself. So it was like, okay, but I just want you to hang out with me. I want you to play with me. I want you to talk to me. And then not having her do that with me, and then not having anyone else, that's when I started to seek, okay, well, these friends that I moved schools to, they just kind of roam and do whatever. Like there's 6 of them in their family, so their parents are just sort of like, have at her, like I've got too many things. So for me, that's when I started to like go out more, stay out later. That's when like I started to lie of where I was going or who I was with or whatever. And I almost felt like my mom didn't deserve to know it because she wasn't around anyways. And it was like a switch in mine, and that's when a lot of issues between my mom and I started to like butt heads. But I could never express that to her because I didn't have the words to express that to her. See, I feel like there's a downfall. There's maybe a good side and a downfall to being so independent at a young age. Because you are independent, you become responsible, you learn how to take care of yourself, how to move, street smarts, all that kind of stuff, right? But at the same time, it flips, and too much freedom. Hey Google, stop the timer. Too much freedom can like really get you into being in the wrong circles, in the wrong groups, because you have no guidance, no focus. Pause that. I need to take my puff pastries out the oven.
They didn't burn, did they?
They fucking did.
Did they?
Damn, I'm saying you're salad to both of us.
But I honestly think about it, and I know that I had Natalia when I was 24, and I know what I was doing when I was her age, right? So I think a lot of our generation too was a lot more street smart because, again, we were the Latchkey kids, right?
you go out, you do your thing.
But I think that a lot of our generation, we tend to be very street smart because we had to basically raise ourselves, right? So it's so funny to me because I was having this conversation, like, okay, so Natalia was acting out or whatever and talking back a bit, and I was getting really irritated. And my mother-in-law kept saying, but she's a really good kid. She's a really good kid. And I was like, what do you mean? She's talking back to me. She's not a really good kid. Like, you're not going to give her this validation. And then the other day I was talking to Wes about it, and I'm like, yeah, she talks back to you, but I'm like, she's not out with friends, she's not drinking, she's not smoking weed.
She's home.
She's home. And I was like, she is a good kid. And I was like, so I'm gonna try. I'm trying really hard just to give her a little bit more space because again, she is turning 14, and there's a lot of hormones I think she may be going through, right? And like even the other day I explained to her, I'm like, I know I'm really hard on you, but like I just want you to get it. Like I just want you to be a boss. I just want you to be a badass chick when you get older. I just want you to like boss up, right? And I was like, because no one ever taught me this stuff. Like there were things I honestly didn't learn until COVID 4 years ago, and I was like all of these things, and I was like, I remember having this conversation with my mom about like French braiding or whatever, and she was like, oh well, how come you don't know how to French braid? And I'm like, well, did you teach me? And it's like, oh well, no, like
how am I gonna learn?
So I just try to always be there, but again, we're so vocal with our kids about making sure you know where your surroundings and like what can happen to you if you lie and say.
See, like, so the funny thing is, like, our parents never had those conversations. Like, you're trying to instill that so much within the kids, but I'm like, because I was like, I think my mom was like, don't talk to strangers. Like, you know, I'm like, I don't know, don't take candy from a stranger. Like your typical things, but it wasn't like be aware of your surroundings. It wasn't so teaching you to be street smart. It was just like you're out there and you learn kind of practical learning. You learn on the job, so to speak, right? Like, so that to me is interesting because I would honestly, at this point, never trust my kids to get themselves up for school and out the door on time by themselves, because like, yeah, they can get themselves up and things, but like if I'm not here, I don't think Brooklyn and Parker would actually get themselves up and ready and out the door.
A few weeks ago, because I'm very like, okay, are you guys ready to go to school? It's time. And I always get like brushed out. It's not time yet. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to give them a little bit more time to figure it out the hard way. So one morning, Talia was in a room, lost track of time. Simone, hurry up. We're going to miss the bus. And I hear the garage open back up. I hear the people come back up the steps. Mom, we missed the bus. And I'm like, oh, how did that happen? Because she said something, and I'm like, and because you weren't, and she's like, paying attention to time. And I'm like, exactly. So what did you learn from this? And she's like, I learned like I need to make sure I'm paying attention and I'm getting up. And she, you know, like she understands. And I was like, even I had phoned my mother-in-law about going back to like, yes. And I had to say to her, I'm like, I understand now what you meant when you said my kids are good kids, because she was like, and then she says to me, she's like, you don't have police knocking on your door because your 13-year-old son stole a boat. Like, you know what I mean? Like, your kids are good. They're not out there. They're not doing drugs. They're not drinking. You know where your kids are. Yeah, she may give you some attitude here and there.
That's normal.
Yes.
I get it. It's been a lot lately. But
it has been.
Normal. Like, think about where I was at 15, 16 years old. I was in them streets. I was living a life with people that were in their 30s. Like, my age now, I was rolling with people when I was 15, 16. There's no hell and high water reason why I should have been hanging out in these crowds.
Knight Rider. That's how you got it.
That is exactly how I got my nickname.
Whore.
Well, you know, that was the people that got me into the game, and you know what? At the end of the day, I perfected the craft, okay?
We both work remote, right?
Yes.
So we're able to be home when our kids get home.
Yeah.
And our kids know if we're not home, we'll be home within the next hour.
Yeah.
I don't think, I think about it like the odd time, or even like last week, I was just like, I'm in a shitty mood and I don't feel like cooking anything. Or if I'm not home and some Natalia will call me, she's like, where are you? What's for dinner? And I was like, if you guys were my age and if you guys would have to figure it out on your own. They get home from, like, and I like to have it so not every time, but most of the time when they get home, like, dinner's ready. Like,
It's so early.
I know.
Like, I don't know how. It's so early.
But I always like to have, like, that way I know I can go to the gym at night and there's still leftovers there.
You're a nighttime
yeah,
person,
I am
right?
a nighttime gym person, so I know that if I make tacos or whatever, okay, there's everything's here, all the fixings. You can eat when you get home, and then if you get hungry later, have another taco, make some noodles, like, you know, and I don't have to worry about, like, oh, I'm so hungry. What's then bugging me when I get home? Because then in my mind, I'm not home till like 7 o'clock from the gym or 6 o'clock, right?
I don't know. So like, for example, do you feel, because your parents, so I feel like my parents were physically absent, right? Which then makes them, in that turn, like, I don't want to say like mentally or emotionally absent as well, but like when you're physically absent, you know less what's going on. You're speaking less, there's less communication, right? And connection time. Do you feel like even though your parents were there physically a lot of the time, they were then absent like emotionally or like you know what I mean?
Feel like my mom because my mom again went like, she feels like she was like, she always felt like she was the black sheep in her family, and she always made sure that I felt validated and wanted and loved and all the above. Whereas I think my dad, because my parents were together until I was 7, and then they separated, and then they got back together when I was like 11, and we moved to Vancouver, and it was like, it's just been a whole thing. But I feel like with my dad, even though he was there, he was very not there, because I don't know if it was like, oh, you're a girl and I don't know how to communicate with you, I don't know if I'm going to overstep my boundaries, I don't want to say the wrong thing to you, so I'm just going to pretend like we're not in the same house. It was just very strange. Like, I know you've had a completely different relationship with my dad,
and that to me is so weird. It's so weird, because growing up, honestly, I really enjoyed your dad being around. Like, I enjoyed talking to him, and like I at that time had a better relationship with him than I did my own dad, because my dad was absent, so I didn't have a relationship with him. So for me, it's just funny how you speak about different people and their relationships with people, how their perception is so different.
And I remember one time we were at, I don't know, you were little though, and this thought just came back to my mind, and my dad was there, and I think it may have been when our dad lived together, when we first moved to Vancouver, and my dad was coming around or whatever. And I remember my dad was like, oh, Ryan came up to me and she's like, if you see my dad, tell him I said hi. And you were just like this cute little kid, right? And I think he just like, because he was there but not there for me, but he felt like, oh, like she just wants her dad, right?
Like the presence is enough.
Yeah, and that's why I think too, and maybe because when I did go away or whatever, he was probably thinking like, damn, if I would have been more there for Kylisha, maybe she would still be here. Maybe we wouldn't be wondering at every night where she is, or she's dead or alive, or whatever the case may be, right? He would call you.
You call people like, hey, I made some saltfish, case you want some? And I'm like, I'm going upstairs to get some saltfish. Like, yeah, Kyle's cooking, I'm going to get myself some food.
But again, you have that different connection with my dad. Like, I've tried so many times to like reconnect with him, and it's just, it starts off okay and then it gets awkward, or he feels like I need to drop everything. Like, if like one time my mom came up and spent Christmas or whatever, and he got mad at me because I wasn't emailing him back right away. But again, there was a time change, and it was like, oh, you're supposed to just drop everything, and like, you didn't even say hi to me, and blah blah blah. And I was like, oh, sorry. And I explained to him, like, oh, sorry, mom's here, and we just were busy all day. And then it was like just mute. Radio silence, nothing. See, and I haven't talked to him really since then.
Well, see, it's funny because like I always think of like my relationship with my dad is very different, but like, as you know, like he wasn't in my life, but he would pop in when a new child was born. So when my sister was born, when I was around 9, he popped back into my life for a minute, introduced me to my sister, yada yada. Oh, wow, you're in my life and I have a sister? Okay. Then he was gone, and then he popped back in again a few years later when my brother was born, and then it was like, okay, you're just popping in to tell me I have another sibling? Like, okay.
Or to make himself look like
a family man.
Yeah.
I don't know, but then he stayed for a bit. But when he stayed, it was I felt manipulative for my mom. In the sense of like, okay, I'm here, I have a new partner, I got 2 kids, and I'm going to try to fit in this dad role, this family role, make up for lost time. But when he was around me, he was very emotionally abusive. He would call me names and like be like, he'd ask me questions. I remember one time when he popped in and I was like 9 or something like that, and at the time he's like, well, basically like asking me questions, and one of them was like my address, and at the time I knew my address, but like I didn't really fully know my full mailing address for some reason. But he was like, how do you not know this, you stupid? Like he would like calling me stupid, or if I didn't know things was like a common occurrence. But just like the way that he talked to me was not okay in many sense. But then I looked at it, and he treated his partners the same way. He would make racial slurs to them because they would be a different nationality. He would like call them stupid. He would just be very verbally and emotionally abusive to their partner, to myself, and he would use me almost as a tool when it came to like child support with my mom or different things. And I never felt like I was his kid. I felt like I was just his pawn to use when he felt like I fit into his life when it was convenient, and then when I wasn't convenient, oh, I got too much to go on. I can't do this right now. It's your mom or whatever. And it would be like gone for years. But then when I was going through a bunch of stuff and going I was in a dark place, you know? And I think a lot of it now I'm learning is that, you know, I had all those pent up emotions and things from being molested from my cousins and my godbrother and things that I never expressed because I didn't know how. And then it all kind of came out in, I don't know, acting out. And that's when he came in to be like, I'm a tough guy, like, you can't do that, you can't talk to your mom like that. I'm like, who the fuck are you to tell me what I can and cannot do? You haven't been here my entire life. Now you want to come in and be in charge? I don't think so. And I think for him, that was like the turning point of a relationship, because I no longer cared to necessarily want to build like a daddy-daughter relationship like I did for so long. It was more of like, fuck you, you weren't around, you want nothing to do with me, but you come when it's convenient for you. And then when my parents got back together, when I was in like, God, grade 11, grade 12 for a stint, it was very awkward, because then my mom and him were together, and I'm like, but you said all this stuff. But you've seen how he treated me, how he treated you, how he, like, why are you with this man? And all of these things. And then it made me even more a latchkey kid, because then my mom was like, oh, I'm going to your dad's house for the weekend. I'm like, I'll just be here. Sounds great. Enjoy your best life. But, like, so for me, even though you say, like, yes, you and your dad have your own relationship, part of me sometimes is, like, grateful that your dad was there. And I think sometimes it's because I would be up there with your brother so much. So maybe to him, I was playing with cars too. I was playing with Lego too. I was playing action figures and superheroes, like boy stuff, because I was very much a tomboy. It wasn't so girly girl. He knew what to do with that, maybe. And it was like different. I don't know. It's interesting that you can be in a house with your parents, but be so disconnected, but then yet not be there and still be disconnected. Like, just having your parents there doesn't make you connected. And I'm grateful every day that I am the parent and able to be the type of parent that I have wanted to be for my kids since I decided I wanted kids as a kid. Like, I am here for my kids. I'm able to take them to school. I'm able to pick them up. I'm able to go to concerts and volunteer at the school and just like be actively in their lives. But again,
it's what you would have wanted your mom to do.
That is exactly what I wanted my mom to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's so funny to me because I remember one time, like, when I was younger, I had asked my mom, I was like, why do you do this? And she's like, because when I was growing up, I didn't have the same thing from my mom, so I'm giving you whatever I didn't get. And I'm like, oh, okay, so it's like a chain reaction. Like, we're always going to do for our kids what we didn't get and what we really wanted. Because I was listening to the radio, and they were talking about, like, Christmas. This was, like, a while ago. And it was, one of the DJs was talking about how she doesn't let her kids watch Christmas movies until it's December, until it's Christmas time. And they're like, that's weird. Like, why? And she's like, because growing up, being Indian, of just, like, I didn't have there was no indication that Christmas was even coming. So she's like, that's what I always wanted. I always wanted tradition growing up. I always wanted parents to be like, okay, let's go watch a Christmas movie. They didn't give a crap if we watched a Christmas movie or not, because they're not Canadian. They're not, like, they don't get it. And she's like, now, I'm like, if I see my kids watching Elf or Home Alone, I'm like, turn it off. We do not watch Christmas movies until December. And I was like, me, personally, when I feel really sad, I watch anything that's going to put me in my warm and fuzzy.
Well, that's why I love Christmas.
That's why I always put on a Christmas movie. I don't know why, but that's just something that I do.
I watch Christmas movies all year round. I'll listen to Christmas songs if I feel like it all year round, because it's all uplifting. It's all joyful. There's like generally no swearing. It's all just very.
But then I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, if you don't like, you're like, there's other things, right, that her kids are going to go. Be like, oh, you can watch Christmas movie
all the time
because I was allowed to watch them until December rolled around.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wondered too at the same time, like if there's anything, like I know I can be really hard on my children, but that's just because they're not listening. It's different, right? Like I'm not part of the whole gentle parenting era of people. Like if I say to do something, I expect you to either do it, and if you don't know how to do it, just ask for help. I don't mind helping you at all, but don't ignore me or pretend like you can't hear me or stuff like that. Yeah, like I don't like that because I find it just so disrespectful, because like I tell my kids all the time, I sacrifice stuff for myself so you can have, right? I don't do anything if I know it's going to cost me X amount of dollars, because I'm like, oh, I can pour that back into my kids and make sure that they're doing things. My hair, my nails, my nails I get done, but my hair and everything else,
you gotta have some
right?
limitations for yourself, like some things, right?
But then I think about it, I remember my dad used to do this all the time. If I said something and if he felt like it was a stupid question, he just wouldn't answer me.
Oh.
He wouldn't say like, oh, he wouldn't even entertain it. It'd just be like, mute. And then I started to get the clue, like, oh, is this a stupid question, or...
But you know what I found? You say that he would ignore you, and at the beginning, because of the way I was raised, I remember talking to my brother about this one time, because he has 2 kids, and I remember we were having this conversation, and we were like, yeah, when we both first had kids, we found parts of our dad coming out in us, in our way of parenting. Like, if it was something that we were like, did you really just say that? The thought of being like, what's wrong with you would come to mind, or like what are you done? Like those thoughts would come to my mind to say, because that's what my dad would say, and that's my brother. He's like, yeah, I've had to catch myself a few times because I would be basically reiterating the same thing that dad would say, and I've had to like train myself not to say that. So for your dad to just ignore you, I don't know what's worse, someone actually telling you you're stupid or just ignoring you because they think you're stupid.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. So
last week I got into it with, like, just Simone wasn't listening, and I started to get really upset and really angry, and I just started to like kind of shut down a bit, because I feel like that's kind of where I'm at right now. That's what I kind of need to do, is that kind of step back.
Right.
So she comes home and I'm just on my bed and I'm just like, whatever. And she came and she like stood in front of me, but she had her back towards me. And I was like, and I kind of rolled my eyes, and she kept looking to the side. She gave me one of those, and I'm like, what? And she was like, I'm mad at you. And I was like, I'm mad at you. And she was like, well, you were rude to me this morning. And I'm like, hey, you were rude to me this morning. So I picked her up and I like,
gave her a hug.
No, I picked her up and I do this thing where I put them in baby jail. So like I bring their, it probably sounds like I'm hurting them, but I'm really not. It's all fun and games. But I was like, what did I do to you? And then she was like, you were being rude to me. And I'm like, okay, but how many times did I ask you to do something and you don't do it? And she just stops and she's like, yeah, I guess.
My kids will say that, and she's like, but I didn't want to listen. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to listen to you when you ask me to get you something then. Like, it will go twofold. Like, I don't know what to tell you. You don't listen, I don't want to listen. Inner healing or doing the shadow work and, like, freaking looking back at your childhood is insane. And I've been doing a lot of that lately and really trying to tap into, like, why I parent the way, or, like, why I react certain ways to situations, and like why that's my impulse reaction, right? And it's just like, okay, take a step back, like this is why, right? And in turn though, it's stemming into also that perception of somebody can be one way with you and very different with somebody else, but their perception does not have to cloud your perception, because your relationships are different with these individuals, right? And that's something that I'm also learning about and has been prominent with. Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Reveal and Heal. And like and subscribe, join our pod, and more content to come.
See you guys later.
Bye.